Welcome to the Nutritious and Delicious podcast with me, Bethany. Our mission is to support you as a busy parent with your nutrition and well-being. After all, at Nutritious and Delicious, we believe a healthy family starts with a healthy parent. So I'm super excited. I have Sarah with me here today. So Sarah is actually a renowned yoga educator. She's a content creator and mama based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She is the author of the award-winning book, which is right behind her there, The Yoga of Parenting. Sarah loves guiding people along their wellness and parenthood journeys. Her words, classes, and social media are very supportive, and it actually helps people feel and seen heard. So thank you so much for coming on to Sarah.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm excited to be here. I know we've been planning this for a little bit, so it's nice to finally get to sit down and do this officially.
Yeah, so we have a great topic here today because this is quite common, I find, with a lot of parents, especially the moms, and this is overcoming the need to put yourself last for self-growth. So I think this is a great topic, and to get some words of wisdom as well from yourself. So kind of just let us know how you kind of got started in the space.
Yeah, I mean, so getting started in which space? In the yoga space, the writing space, the self-care
Kind of
space?
like
Because
your
I feel
whole,
like it's been a lifelong journey. I grew up in a home of alcoholics and addicts, so
okay.
my tendency to put myself last came quite naturally. That was how I was able to, I either made myself very big to be seen or very small, to not be seen. And that then translated into very people pleasing tendencies. And in pretty much all of my jobs, I worked in film for a little bit. I worked for a producer who was, very overbearing and, would just gave up my life for everything that the company needed.
Right.
To the point where my health started to get affected. And that's when my sister's like, I think you need to get back to yoga. Because I had started yoga when I was in college. But it was out of like that I had been putting myself last in this career choice that I decided to start doing my practice and really getting serious about it and making a career shift.
Mm-hmm.
Also, my mom got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer at the time, and I was putting her first. I was putting everything first. And so getting serious about my yoga practice again, getting back to that was kind of my first foray into self-care. But of course, being a person of extremes, I took it way too far because my mom passed a few years after I started teaching, and then I just poured myself into my teaching and suddenly was giving myself entirely to my teaching, right? So even though it was in the name of self-care, everything I was doing was for my students or for, the growth of my career. It was feeding this kind of emptiness inside. And so naturally that then translated into family too, right? I was attracting men where I was giving myself over, and I'm glad I found my husband who, was holding space for me. But, very quickly when I got pregnant, we got pregnant first, had a loss, and then pregnant with my first son, I very quickly gave myself over to the point of, feeling very lost. And it's not even that I necessarily didn't fight for myself. I think I was just so overwhelmed. I had a COVID baby. He was born 2 or 3 months before COVID. He was born in December 2019. So we were completely shut down. And I just thought that this is what you do. This is what moms do. You give yourself over entirely, and you don't ask for what you need, and you don't step up, and you don't say like, I don't go to the bathroom until everybody else has gone to the bathroom. I don't eat until everybody else has eaten. And it just got more and more extreme because then I went back to work. I started teaching again, and then I was giving myself entirely there, and there was nothing filling my tank. Right. And my postpartum anxiety got so out of sorts, and it was so extreme that I was frozen. It was to the point where I wasn't giving myself anything. So I literally had nothing to give. I couldn't move. There was times where I would be just frozen, unsure what to do. It was like there was cement poured over me, but my mind was racing. And that's when I knew I had to get serious about my self-care plan and really, like you said, that starting to put myself first, really walking the walk that I had been telling people for years. It's one thing to tell people to take care of themselves. It's quite another to actually do it yourself. And so I sought some help. I ended up finding this psychiatrist, and getting help on that level. But I also got much more serious about my meditation. I started prioritizing waking up early before the rest of my family, and not in a punishing way like what I
Yeah.
did in my early years, where I was like trying to get ahead, or it was all about that kind of empty pursuit of happiness. This was about fill my cup, fill my cup, fill my cup. And even the simplest choice of like, I will eat before I feed them sometimes has made an enormous difference. And now we're 4 years, past that. I've
Yeah.
got 2 kids, and, I really, and even though people, you'll still get it even from those closest to you, like, you're being
Yeah.
selfish right now. It's like, no, do you want me to be an empty shell that literally can't provide anything to anybody? Or do you
Mhm.
want me to be a well from which I can pour all of my goodness?
That's amazing. I love the analogies that you use. I can definitely attest to that feeling of like thinking that that's how motherhood is. I remember that was my first go around with my son. I didn't have any babies during the pandemic. And how old are your kids now?
4 and 1.5, like a little
Okay.
older than 1.5. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're quite a bit younger than mine. My boys currently are 8 and 10, but definitely with my first, I think it was the understanding as well of that, like, this is just how it is. You just give everything over. You practically don't eat, don't shower, like,
Yeah.
until like everything's done, and there's a never-ending to-do list. And it's a struggle, and it took me a long time as well, like yourself, to kind of realize that like you can't just keep doing that. And another thing I overheard what you were saying as well is kind of like saying yes to everything, really, when you're meaning no, because you
Mhm.
don't have sort of that energy to kind of expend. And you, like you said, throughout your work, throughout being a mom and stuff, it's like you were constantly sort of saying yes to everybody but yourself.
Yes.
So, that's a huge thing. What have you noticed for yourself and sort of in the industry in the last several years, and sort of coming out of this for yourself? Like, what have you noticed around you that's been happening?
I mean, I think something that's been really cool is, so there's like the yoga industry, right? And what I've noticed in the yoga industry is that the conversation of rest has become very en vogue, right? Like, where when I was coming up, it was all about the hardest possible pose, and could you handstand, and let's be honest, it was really like very skinny white women on the cover of magazines. We weren't even honoring yoga's roots.
Yeah.
And now I think there's much more appreciation for accessible yoga, body diversity, and
Hmm.
this idea that rest is just as important as the work, if not more, considering the type of life that we all lead.
Right.
So I'm really, really, really happy to see that. And I don't, sometimes I wonder, like, is it just because I'm now 41 and I was 21 before, when I started? Like, is it just my own natural evolution? But I don't think so. I mean, I can see it on the covers of magazines. I can see it in the content that people are interested in, whether it's me writing it or just the stuff that I'm consuming. So I do think there is this honoring of rest. I really do think that COVID was a tipping point for many.
Right.
As difficult as it was and as challenging as it was, I think mothers were put to the brink. People that have addiction challenges were put to the brink.
Hmm.
A lot of people that were overworking, everything kind of came bubbling to the surface, and it was
Yeah.
really this, like, you had an opportunity, and not everybody got through it, right? As we know, I had a lot of friends who relapsed, and we lost people. But then there's also the other side, where some people saw this as an opportunity to, like, let's make a change, or
Yeah.
that they reached their bottom, but they still also were able to make a change. So one of the things in the motherhood sector that I think has been incredible is that before the shutdowns, and like when I was just trying to get pregnant, we were just talking about getting pregnant. It's like 2018. It was still like everything had to look perfect. You had to have your maternity shoot. Your Instagram feed had to be like, it didn't have to be, but this is what it felt like in that world. Like, it was like, had to be color coded, and everything was about how it appeared. And it was all very like,
Yeah.
perfect and put together. And I think through the pandemic, everyone just started to show up more rawly. They started to
Hmm.
show up in their living rooms, no makeup on.
Yeah.
And just, it was really about the content. It was about what was being shared and said. And there was mother creators on there, people like Libby Ward, who's Diary of an Honest Mom, who were speaking truth that had never been spoken before. They
Right.
were saying things about the mental load of motherhood and, generational trauma pressures that nobody had really talked about before. I mean, maybe there's always the few like seekers and who were saying it well beforehand. But for it to come into the zeitgeist, that really started around then. And now I think it's really cool. I mean, I love seeing people being very honest. I know some people feel like it's swung to the other side and now it just sounds like a bunch of complaining, but I think you just really got to parse through and remember that humans are nuanced and we can hold a yes and, it can be hard and I can love my kids, but it's like both of those things can be happening at the same time.
That's great. How did the yoga and parenting come together then into a book? So I want to kind of hear how that kind of happened.
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing literally since I could put pen to paper. I wrote my first book when I was like 4, literally like a picture book on a computer. And then I've been writing for different yoga publications for a long time. And I knew I wanted to write a book. I'd written books, but never one that was published, books for myself when I was like a teenager. But I didn't know what that book would be. It was just always there on my shoulder. Like, I just was like, you're going to write a book. And I didn't know what it was. And it's funny to look back at all my old goals because and it's kind of this conversation, what we're talking about, which is like my initial book that I wanted to write was like an anatomy manual, like very like physical, very external, the things that you see. And then the next variation was going to be like, how do you apply the philosophy to, everyday living, which is kind of what the book ended up being anyway. But it was like my work was so external and it was so like, what does things look like on the outside? Everything is out there. And then as the motherhood journey took me inside and literally turned me inside out, I had this realization, that like, first of all, that I was like, oh my gosh, the book that I was looking for that I couldn't find anywhere was the book that I was going to end up writing.
Right.
So, and I am, never claimed to be a parenting expert. I'm, a mindfulness and yoga teacher. I'm a longtime yoga teacher. I would never even say I'm a yoga expert. But what I decided to do was to go and start interviewing people. And that's what I do really well is I love, like you, I love asking questions. I love getting deeper. I'm just so intrigued by that. And so through all these interviews, I just started to pull out all these threads and these commonalities. And it was people that, were either yoga teachers or psychologists or were, just parents. Some of them were just, yoga students that I knew who were grandparents. And I started to pull the threads. And then I realized all of these common attributes and put it together into the book form, which was, it just ended up being this perfect little third baby.
Oh, wonderful. I love that you've put it all together, and it's crazy because a lot of the times I think we do think that something like that will happen. So you saying to yourself that like, I'm eventually going to write a book one day, and you kind of started at 4. That's really young to say like where your passion was. That's amazing. What is some kind of points out of the book that you could kind of share with some of the parents here that are struggling with sort of putting themselves first in terms of like their self-growth?
Yeah. I mean, the whole book is that, right? It's many different chapters that are all about that. But the thing that kept coming to mind when we were talking is this idea of boundaries.
Right.
And like that saying yes to one thing is saying no to another thing, and saying no to something is often saying yes to yourself. So it's the idea now in the yoga world and in yoga classes, we talk about a balance between a pose being strong and soft, strong and soft. It's always a combination of those things, and you're always trying to find balance between those. So like even just lifting your arms up, right? You can like squeeze your arms together and that's really strong, and sure, that's great. You can hold it up there for like a moment, or you can have your arms up and it's really loose and soft and maybe you have more space, but like even that gets heavy. How are you finding the balance between just the right amount of tension and strength, because we do need tension for integrity, and just the right amount of softness? And it's in a physical pose, but I also think that this is how we live our lives as well. How much structure do we need and how much flexibility do we need within that?
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. When I think about a lot of the other parents and people I've interviewed as well, there's a lot of, I think in general, I don't know if this is like the Western society or not, but it's very structured, organized, routines. Like you said, it's a very outward appearance. And it seems like
Mhm.
what you would call in the yoga, it was the strong poses. So there's a
Yes,
ton of
Thera. Yeah.
strong poses going on, but there's not a lot of soft. And then if it is, it's like led with guilt, or like shame around like having to like you actually working on yourself. And I find that, um, especially with mothers and stuff, there's not a lot of permission to be in those soft places, those soft poses. And even just in terms of like there's a lot of more, I want to say masculinity, in women now in the workforce and stuff, and like women running their businesses, myself included. And it feels like you have to sort of be a bit different, to sort of to get somewhere. And it's hard because you're trying to find that like feminine side of you as well, and that softness. And I find for myself, my body sort of pushes me into that state. If I'm
Mm.
doing too much, it's either I'll get really sick for like an entire week, or like I'm just so exhausted, like I'm so tired, I almost have to just like, take those breaks throughout the day, because I've kind of been working myself too hard, maybe mentally as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I know it's hard when we say like masculine and the feminine and the yin and the yang, and I know like there is some schools that are like, let's stop calling it masculine and feminine, but I also know some schools that are hanging on to it because it's just describing qualities,
Hmm.
masculine and feminine energy. And you're very right. In the West, the overculture in the West is very masculine in that it's that intense yang energy, right?
Hmm.
Work, 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 produce, 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 generate, generate, generate. It
Hmm.
is that outward push where the more feminine yin side of things tends to be receiving, allowing, trusting. That's that kind of more moon versus sun. And neither
Right.
is better or worse, right? They're both
Yeah.
neutral. They're both just what they are, but you need the two to balance. And unfortunately, like we're saying, that feminine side is just not honored. And it's especially not honored for mothers who need that when whether you've carried your child or given birth, but those initial years of becoming a mother. And I think even I would argue, because I've had friends foster or adopt children that are a little bit older, it's just that transformation practice. You need those years to slow down, to get into your rhythm, to find a rhythm with this new being in your life, this new soul in your home. And we don't honor that, so we have to fight for it, and then we fight for it, and then it's like either people look down upon it, or it just feels like an uphill battle the whole time. But I am hopeful. I mean, like conversations like what you inspire and your offerings, and like I said, what I'm seeing now on social media and the conversations that I'm having, I am hopeful that we are starting to honor that again, right? It's like there are cycles to everything. There's the
Yeah.
up and the go and the down and the rest. And so how do we start to really tap into those so that we can flourish? Because believe it or not, right, we think we just go 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 go, but if we take the downslope, if we allow the rest, that next
Hmm.
go will be even higher and higher and higher. We progress more when we rest first.
Definitely. And that, I think that is very true of everything, is that we don't sort of let that progression happen. I think we are sort of in that push society where we always want to see the
Mm,
uptrend of everything. And if we see a down, sort of a downward, I think a lot of people get scared that it's never going to come back again.
exactly.
What would you say in terms of helping people kind of get to that place of nurturing themselves, to be able to basically nurture their children as well and have that time of rest? Maybe it's a period of their life. Maybe it's they're burnt out from work, or they're burnt out, and they want to kind of have that downtime with their children. Like, what would be something that you would say in terms of some solutions or tips that you've done yourself to kind of help you get to that place? Maybe it's an understanding, or just starting there.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I know some people will be listening to this audio, but like, I don't know if you can see all the leaves falling off of the tree in the back here. And when we get scared that we're going to be stuck in one season, we just have to look outside to nature to remember that it is always changing and everything is cyclical. That's just the nature of living in this world. And what the yoga practices teach us, the ancient wisdom texts, is that nature, like literally nature outside, but also everything that is of matter is changing. Your body's changing, your kids are changing, your emotions are changing. So the goal, at least in yoga, and I don't even like saying goal because that puts a hierarchy to it, but the intention in yoga then is finding that place that's steady and that place that feels constant. So that's that, like, the love connection, right? So how I would then, that's just like you're afraid you're never going to have an up again. Well, reflect on your life and, and it, obviously, like, if there is medical, depressive symptoms and mood disorders, then you may need help coming up again. But for most of us that are just, riding in that, somewhat normal range of hormones and seasons and aging, every down will have an up and every up will have a down. So when we're afraid of getting stuck, I always go outside and I just remind myself this is just a season. And then how to actually execute that in my home is, first of all, like, and my kids are young still, right? Like talk to me in a couple of years, like when it's the sports seasons. But I have a family member who he's like scheduled to the T. He's 1 year older than my son. He's 5 years old. He's in drama club, horseback riding, this and this. Like they have a whole plan to get him into the best school. They're already talking colleges. The kid is 5 years old. And I highly, highly invite everybody to go out and buy that book, Never Enough. Jennifer, and I'm blanking on her last name right now. It's Jennifer, I want to say Leahy, but maybe not. She wrote a book about never enough in the overachieving culture, which is this idea of like, go, 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 go. So what we've discussed as a family, and obviously it'll be different when my boys are pushing and wanting to, be in the things that their friends are doing, but I don't want to be doing more than one activity per section. Especially because we have 2 kids. Like I don't understand how my friends who have 3 kids in 3 different sports all happening at the same time. Like, we have to also honor our own systems, and we have to trust that, what happens in junior year of college isn't really going to make or break the rest of our life, and so prioritizing the slow moments, prioritizing the times, like next week is similar. You and I are recording this in November. It's going to be Thanksgiving next week. And like most of my friends are putting their kids into camps. And I'm like, I don't really want to do that. And I know it's harder for me. And by the way, I have the privilege of having the flexibility in my job to be able to have them. But and I'll probably regret it by Wednesday or Tuesday. But I want them to just have that downtime. Like, let's just go to let's just wander around the city. Let's just go to a museum. They don't always have to be doing and achieving, because when they are, that means that pressure's on us too. So that's one way that at least my intention is, and again, check back in 18 years, is that we are going to be really choosy. And I see it with friends who have teenagers, and a lot of the people that I actually interviewed for the book who've been very intentional about how they schedule their kids, or how they allow their kids to schedule themselves, I should say. That's a really helpful one.
Exactly what you're talking about. I had this conversation with some other people that I had on the podcast, and we were talking about that, basically how we're in a society where everything is so overscheduled, and I can see that happening. More so, kids are coming to school a lot more tired. Parents are exhausted as well. And like you said, like if you have 2-3 kids and they're all doing different activities, like I couldn't even fathom that. For us, we kind of say the same thing, where it's like one thing, like keep to one thing. And, usually I have them in the same thing, just because I don't want to sort of be running all over the place myself. And if, they can try different things if they want to, but I think what people sometimes are afraid of is their kids being bored or something, or they're going to get into trouble. But that doesn't really solve the problem. Like, if anything, when they're younger, letting them be bored actually helps them be more creative, you know?
Yes. I mean, like, go to the research, right? It's exactly what you said. Boredom generates creativity and ideas and imaginative play. And, that's where you're going to have much more of that artistic side coming
Mhm.
out. But also the getting into trouble part, like maybe, it does help to have them structured. But when they're structured to the point of having severe anxiety,
Yeah.
the long-term effects of that on mental health, I mean, it's debilitating. I like, again, everybody's got to read this book because it's both sobering but also very hopeful, because she provides some really really good information in there, and particularly on this idea of mattering, which I think is another point. And we talk about this in my book, and this is a lot of the thing in yoga too. It's like exactly what you were saying. What really matters? The
Right.
outside accolades, the like making the highest position on the team, the getting into the best college, or the deep connection that you're forming with your friends and your family and those that you love.
Right.
And really just making that the culture in your home, even if that's not the culture outside of the home.
Yeah, we're very strong on that ourselves too. And that's interesting that, I think I've sort of naturally come to that place just in my life, and helping my boys sort of understand that too. It's not about the external and like what can we get in terms of trophies or anything in that aspect, but it's more about like how can we sort of show up for the people in our life and fill up our own tank first. And I always have said to my little kids, like from the get-go, like if you can't sort of fill up your own bucket, you can't give to other people, because it's like you putting holes in your bucket and there's water constantly coming out. So I think little kids can definitely understand that, and that analogy. What other information or kind of a last piece of advice would you give to somebody that is struggling sort of with that feeling of like having to do everything themselves, and sort of putting themselves on the last burner here?
Well, I'd love to end with a story because you just reminded me right now. So, as I said, when my son was first born, I was definitely like, I was last on my list, and I paid for it. But then I worked really, really hard to take my rest days. And I'm very clear with my son. I'm going in the room to watch TV. We don't hide it. I'm
Yeah.
like, mama needs a rest. Dada needs a rest right
Yeah.
now. Like, we are taking a break. So that's something that we have been trying to model. It's something that we've been, very precious about since the second son was born, like
Yeah.
really, really making sure to have that time. So anyway, cut to my second son is born, and he is like in your face extrovert. Like, his new favorite song is Beastie Boys Sabotage. Like, he is just like, "Bleh." Like, that's
Yeah.
just his personality. My first son is not. My first son is very introverted and quiet.
Yeah.
So what my first son has started to do is request time to himself.
Aw.
He's requested staying in his room in the morning to just have some time to be quiet. He's
Mhm.
requested eating breakfast alone in his room so that
Mhm.
he can have some time to fill his own tank. And
Yeah.
at first I was like anxious and scared, and I'm like, I should, is he going to be a loner? Is this? And then I realized, oh my goodness, no, he's modeling back what we have been showing him.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
very good about knowing when, okay, I need to fill my tank right now. I can't handle you in my
Yeah.
face screaming constantly.
Yeah.
And, there'll be times where like we'll all be at the dinner table talking, and he's like, okay, I think I need some silence right now. So something is happening. I mean, I like to think that that's, I don't take credit for a lot of things in parenting, because I think that these little beings come into our life, and
Yeah.
we do our best and we create the container, but really, that there's a lot more at play there. But I like to think that there is some influence from us on that,
Mhm.
or at the very least that we honor it, because
Mhm.
I don't think that was definitely not being honored in my home. It was
Right.
like, get up, go, we got to go, you got to go, you got to be in part of this group thing, even though you're mentally exhausted. I do morning mental health days with him,
Yeah.
where it's just the two of us, and he just needs quiet and he needs that space. So my advice is like, let the kids lead,
Yeah.
and trust them in those moments. And you would be surprised, right, at how intuitive they are about when they need the up and when they need the down. And it's really amazing because it happens like within minutes with kids.
Yeah.
They'll be like resting and then up, and then but
Yeah.
just watching them, letting them lead is a really beautiful gift.
That's great. I love that analogy because I kind of teach that with nutrition to parents too, with like kids where they feel like they get anxious, like what you said, stressed because they're not eating certain vegetables or protein or whatever it is. But I usually just say like you have to sort of back up a little bit and like let them like lead a little bit more because you got to give them a bit more choice. And then once you do that, they're actually more like likely to go for vegetables and things that you're putting out there. So you can sort of set up the like whatever you're doing, like you said for yourself, like you're kind of setting that up for your son, and he's actually responding with like, yes, I would like some time too. And that's
Mm,
great. And it's interesting because yeah, there's times where I think we've come from places ourselves where that hasn't been given permission. And it's in, I think what I heard from what you said, it's almost like the but I'm burnt out, I don't want to go out. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter, you know. So you start to hear this tape in your head, well, I'm burnt out, but it doesn't matter, I got to keep going. And that's that constant saying yes to everything, right? So I love how you're teaching this to your kiddos. So where can our listeners find you, Sarah?
real quick, it's like it's also getting ahead of the burnout, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, yes, they're burnt out and so they don't want to go outside, but it's also like getting ahead of it. Like it really is this ongoing cycle. It's like this never ending loop. But yeah, it's like you take the break so you don't get burnt out so that you can then, get back out there, and it's just this ongoing loop. You can find me on my website, sarahezrinyoga.com, or on Instagram, Sarah Ezrin Yoga. I'm also on TikTok and Threads and all the things. And I love hearing from everybody. My book is available wherever you get your book. It's on Audible and Amazon and Target. And you can also find it in stores. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so excited to get to sit with you again next week.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.